Real Cowboys Wear Cowboy Hats, written by Reuben White. Chapter 1. Ghosts of the Past. The sun hung high and unforgiving over Ironwood, casting long, wavering shadows across its dusty streets. The mountains loomed like silent sentinels, guarding secrets as old as time. Ironwood was a town built on grit and determination, where every man wore his hat low and his gun even lower. Tom Harlan, the sheriff of Ironwood, walked with the purposeful stride of a man who had seen too much and carried the world's weight on his broad shoulders. His steel blue eyes, like cold mountain streams, missed nothing as he surveyed the bustling town. He tipped his hat to Mrs. Johnson, the town baker, as she passed by, her face lined with years of hard work and hard times. "Afternoon, Sheriff," she greeted him with a weary smile. "Afternoon, ma'am," Tom replied, his voice steady and calm, betraying none of the turmoil that churned within him. The town was gearing up for the annual rodeo, a beacon of hope and tradition in these parts. Banners fluttered in the breeze, and children ran about, their laughter a brief respite from the harsh realities of frontier life. But Tom's mind was elsewhere, haunted by the specter of a friendship long shattered. Years ago, Tom and Jed Cooper had been inseparable, two sides of the same coin. They worked the ranches together, dreamed of a future filled with endless possibilities. But fate had a cruel way of dealing its hand. Jed's family had been killed in a raid, and the law had failed to bring the culprits to justice. Consumed by grief and betrayal, Jed had walked a darker path, one that led him far from the light of their shared dreams. Tom had chosen a different road, dedicating his life to the law, vowing to bring justice to a lawless land. Now, as the sheriff of Ironwood, he found himself pitted against his former friend, a man he once called brother. Chapter 2. The Outlaw's Return. On the outskirts of town, hidden among the shadows of the abandoned mine, Jed Cooper sat astride his horse, a grim smile playing on his lips. The years had not been kind to Jed. The once promising young ranch hand had transformed into a hardened outlaw, his face weathered by time and the elements. "Tonight's the night," Jed muttered to himself, his eyes glinting with a mixture of determination and vengeance. His gang, a ragtag group of desperados, awaited his signal. They were ready to execute the most daring heist Ironwood had ever seen, robbing the town's gold reserves stored in the old mine. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the rugged landscape, Jed's thoughts drifted back to simpler times. He remembered the laughter, the shared dreams, and the bond he had once shared with Tom. But those memories were quickly overshadowed by the pain and anger that had driven him to this point. "Real cowboys wear cowboy hats," Jed murmured, touching the brim of his hat. It was a phrase they used to say, a symbol of their unbreakable bond. Now, it felt like a cruel joke. Chapter 3. The Sheriff's Resolve. Back in town, Tom could feel the tension in the air, a palpable sense of foreboding that clung to him like a second skin. He had heard whispers of Jed's return, rumors of the planned heist. He knew that tonight would bring a reckoning, one that had been years in the making. Tom gathered his deputies, men he trusted with his life. "Tonight, we stop Jed Cooper," he said, his voice unwavering. "We bring him to justice, and we protect this town." As the night deepened, Tom stood at the edge of the town, his gaze fixed on the abandoned mine. It was a place steeped in history, and now it would be the stage for their final confrontation. He mounted his horse and led his men into the darkness, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Mine. The air inside the mine was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Jed and his gang moved silently through the tunnels, their lanterns casting eerie shadows on the walls. They reached the chamber where the gold was stored, and Jed's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Load it up," he ordered, his voice echoing through the cavern. As his men began to transfer the gold, a distant sound caught Jed's attention, the unmistakable clink of spurs on the rock. "Hold it right there, Jed," Tom's voice rang out strong and clear. Jed turned slowly, his hand hovering near his gun. "Tom," he said, a bitter smile curling his lips, "I figured you'd show up." Tom stepped into the light, his eyes locked on Jed. "It doesn't have to end like this," he said, his voice tinged with a sadness that cut through the tension. "Doesn't it?" Jed replied, his voice hard. "You chose your path, Tom, and I chose mine." Chapter 5. The final showdown. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Both men stood poised, ready to draw. The cavern seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. "Jed, you don't have to do this," Tom said, desperation creeping into his voice. "We can find another way." "There's no other way," Jed snapped, his hand moving towards his gun. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mine, a deafening roar that reverberated off the walls. The two men fired. Simultaneously, their shots ringing out like a deadly symphony. Tom felt a searing pain in his shoulder, but he kept his focus on Jed. The outlaw staggered, clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers. "It's over, Jed," Tom said, his voice a mixture of relief and sorrow. But Jed wasn't done yet. With a final burst of strength, he lunged at Tom, and the two men grappled, their struggle sending them crashing into the mine's supports. The ground shook, and the walls began to crumble. "Get out of here!" Tom shouted to his deputies. "The mine's coming down." As the mine began to collapse around them, Tom and Jed fought on, their past and present colliding in a whirlwind of dust and debris. Rocks fell, and the tunnel caved in, separating them as the world around them turned to chaos. Chapter 6. The aftermath. The dust settled, and a heavy silence descended over the ruined mine. The townsfolk had rushed to the scene, desperate to know the fate of their sheriff and the notorious outlaw. Amid the rubble, a solitary cowboy hat lay, a poignant symbol of the unresolved conflict between Tom and Jed. "Tom! Jed!" voices called out, but there was no response. Inside the mine, Tom lay buried under a pile of rocks, pain coursing through his body. He could barely move, but he was alive. "Jed," he whispered, hoping against hope that his old friend had survived. A groan answered him, faint but unmistakable. "Tom," Jed's voice came, weak and strained. "You still with me?" "Yeah," Tom replied, relief flooding through him. "I'm here." The two men lay in the darkness, their fates uncertain, but the bond they had once shared flickering back to life. They were no longer sheriff and outlaw, but two friends caught in the crossfire of destiny. Epilogue. A new dawn. The rescue efforts continued through the night, and as dawn broke over Ironwood, the townsfolk finally pulled Tom and Jed from the wreckage. Both men were battered and bruised, but alive. As they were carried to safety, Tom reached out and took Jed's hand. "It's over, Jed," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "We're done fighting." Jed nodded, tears in his eyes. "Yeah, Tom, it's over." The townsfolk watched in awe as the two former enemies were brought back to town, side by side. The annual rodeo would go on, a symbol of hope and renewal. And for Tom and Jed, a new chapter had begun, one where the past could finally be laid to rest. Real cowboys wear cowboy hats, but they also know when to hang them up and find a new path. Tom and Jed had come full circle, their journey one of redemption and reconciliation. The future of Ironwood was bright, and for the first time in years, both men felt a sense of peace. If you are enjoying adventures in the Old West, Feel free to hit the subscribe button for future posts.